Thank you for that question. Protection from sexual exploitation and abuse. When the United Nations works in a country in partnership with the government and other partners, it's important that we do no harm in doing so. So in terms of sexual exploitation and abuse, which causes great harm, it's an abuse of human rights, and it breaks the trust between us and those that we aim to serve. So the first priority has to be prevention. We need to do everything that we can to prevent sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment from happening in the first place. However, sexual exploitation and abuse is endemic in every society. And thus, as the United Nations is a microcosm of society, it's almost inevitable that it will happen within the United Nations, even if we do everything we can to try to ensure that it doesn't. When it does happen, it's important that we respond effectively and we address it robustly. So we need to ensure that the victims and survivors of sexual exploitation and abuse receive the assistance that they need, that their rights are protected. We need to ensure that there's no impunity. So those who commit these acts need to be held accountable for their acts, their actions. We need to learn from these experiences, and we need to ensure that we're continuously looking to be better in preventing and addressing sexual exploitation and abuse. That's our main priorities. We need to work very closely with both civil society and with government to ensure that we uphold our accountability to victims, to the rights of victims, to ensure that they get the assistance and support that they need, and to ensure that we listen to the victims so their voices are heard. Governments have ultimate responsibility for protection of civilians within their country, within their borders. And therefore, as a sovereign responsibility, we need to work with governments so that they take up the responsibility of protecting the people from sexual exploitation and abuse. That includes prevention, that includes addressing it when it happens, that includes ensuring the victims get the assistance that they need. Working with civil society organizations, often civil society organizations, along with government, they are responsible for provision of services for those who are affected by gender-based violence. So it's important that we work closely with government and with civil society to ensure that any victims of sexual exploitation and abuse have access to the services that they need. With communities, it's also important that they understand their rights to assistance, their rights to be able to complain, their rights to be able to report to the UN when something happens. So these are some of the things that we work closely with government and with other partners, including civil society. If you work for the United Nations, you need to subscribe to the United Nations values and principles as laid down in the Charter. And that includes ensuring protection of civilians and human rights. Sexual exploitation and abuse is a fundamental abuse of people's human rights and is completely prohibited within the United Nations. So in order to prevent it, we have put in place a framework. We've put in place policies, procedures, SOPs, and trainings to make sure people are aware of what is required of them and that they practice these good behaviors. Leadership is another important quality. We need to ensure our leaders understand the importance of this issue and of talking about this issue with their teams. There are other things that we've done in terms of prevention, particularly, for example, in peacekeeping operations, including things like ensuring the integrity of the boundaries of camps, ensuring proper access control, spot checks, proper internet access, so soldiers and police officers can keep a connection with their families, good accommodation and food, adequate recreation facilities and sports facilities. All these things contribute to reducing the risk of sexual exploitation and abuse and preventing it, making sure that people take leave on a regular basis in order to keep that connection with their families. So there are a lot of practical measures that we've implemented in order to prevent sexual exploitation and abuse. Another way to prevent sexual exploitation and abuse and to discourage sexual exploitation and abuse is to ensure accountability of perpetrators. When you show that people are being held to account for their misconduct, then it's an incentive for others not to commit this type of misconduct. And I think that's also an important measure. But we're doing a lot, but we need to keep doing these things because sexual exploitation and abuse is a part of cost of doing business. It is an ever-living danger. There are many different reasons for visiting Uruguay, partly because there is a new government in Uruguay, so I think it's a good opportunity to meet with the government, to explain the risks associated with sexual abuse or sexual exploitation and abuse, to speak with the government about the government's responsibilities in terms of protection from sexual exploitation and abuse. Because, as I said earlier, protection from sexual exploitation and abuse at the end of the day is a sovereign responsibility. The government has responsibility for protecting all those within its boundaries. To work with governments, different departments, different ministries, to ensure that they have the necessary frameworks in place and the necessary policies and procedures and accountability mechanisms in place in order to protect those that they are serving from sexual exploitation and abuse. I'm also here to work with the country team, UN country team, to make sure that they also know their responsibilities, to help them to ensure that they have the necessary structures and advocacy programs in place in order to address sexual exploitation and abuse. And then lastly, to work with the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Defense and the military, because there have been a number of cases of sexual exploitation and abuse with the Uruguayan military when serving in peacekeeping operations, including some children born as a result of sexual exploitation and abuse. So I'm here also to help try and resolve those issues with the military to make sure paternity claims are addressed and addressed quickly, and to make sure that the prevention and the prevention programs are in place to ensure that we reduce the risk of it happening again. I think that the UN, because the UN has worked for many years in this area, in many different situations, in many different environments and countries, we have a lot to offer the government of Uruguay in terms of best practices in helping the government to implement its own protection from sexual exploitation and abuse programs, whether that's in ministries such as the Ministry of Health, which provides health services across Uruguay, or with the Ministry of Interior or the Ministry of Defense, to ensure that the security services also understand what is required of them and how they address issues involving sexual exploitation and abuse in their own environments.